Dear members of Black Horror Stories, today we will be sharing a personal experience that was sent to us by someone seeking help. Towards the end, you'll find more information about her, and if you're able to help, please don't hesitate to let us know. The story starts now. I am a woman of Hindustani descent named Nishma, currently 51 years old. I have been married for 31 years and have a 21-year-old daughter. As was customary among Hindustani people, my parents arranged my marriage. They decided whom I should marry, and at the age of 20, I was married to a man named Robbie. When I moved in with my in-laws after the wedding, there were a total of 8 people living in their house. My husband, Robbie, was the eldest son. From the beginning of my marriage, things went wrong. I lived with my in-laws for a total of 8 years. I was the one who had to do all the household chores. The care of all 8 people rested on my shoulders. I was basically like Cinderella and had to cater to everyone's needs. I literally worked myself to exhaustion to please everyone. There were numerous rules for me. For example, I was not allowed to work outside the home. Finding a job was out of the question, and as a result, I couldn't make friends. I was heavily bullied by my in-laws during those 8 years. While living there, I noticed that a snake would often slither out of the bedroom where my husband and I slept. It wasn't a normal snake. It had 2 heads. Naturally, I was upset and screamed whenever I saw that snake because, like most people, I am very afraid of snakes. Robbie's younger brother would rush in, grab the snake, put it in a rice sack, and then dump it outside on the roadside. He never killed the snake. One weekend, I went to visit my parents at their house. Upon returning to my in-laws, I saw my mother-in-law busy from morning until noon near a large tree we had on the property. I approached her and asked what she'd been doing all that time. She told me that since the morning, she had seen a very large cobra lying there, refusing to leave. She had tried everything to get the creature off the property, but nothing seemed to work, and it remained there without budging an inch. Furthermore, my mother-in-law also mentioned that the snake had been there all weekend. She took a large stick and tied a cloth soaked in oil to the end, constantly poking the snake with it to irritate it and hopefully make it leave. But despite all her efforts and various attempts, the huge creature still didn't budge. When neighbors came to see why my mother-in-law had been busy on the property all day, they immediately said that this was no ordinary snake, but a sacrificial voodoo snake. An elderly woman from the neighborhood, knowledgeable about such cultural matters, came and began to pray and communicate with the snake. She asked the creature why it had come there and why it was scaring people. "Go back to where you came from. You don't belong here," she said. Of course, the whole neighborhood was in an uproar. No one liked snakes. I don't know everything the old woman communicated with the snake, but strangely enough, shortly after the communication, the snake suddenly began to move and slowly slithered off the property. Everyone watching was amazed, and I couldn't believe my eyes that the snake listened to the old woman. Exactly 1 month after this incident, my father-in-law suddenly passed away. He suddenly complained of chest pain, and by the time they took him to the ER, it was too late. After my father-in-law's death, I was finally allowed to work outside the home, It was as if my mother-in-law suddenly had no time to bully me. While living with my in-laws, I never got pregnant. My husband and I tried our best to conceive a child, but it just didn't happen. Eventually, we went to the gynecologist to see what options she had for us. But even with her advice and fertility medication, I still couldn't get pregnant. After that, we went to an old indigenous woman who said that I had a spiritual problem. After all the suffering I had experienced in my in-laws' house, I decided to move from that place. Together with my husband, I moved to a new city where we stayed for 6 months in a rental house. My mother-in-law then came up with a proposal that we could live in one of her properties, with my husband acting as the caretaker of the estate. I knew my mother-in-law had come up with this because this property was not far from her own house. This way, she could keep a closer eye on us. I didn't want to accept this offer to stay in one of her houses, but because it was free, I decided to move in with my husband into that house. Once we were settled there was no one at home in the morning because both Robbie and I had jobs and went to work. One afternoon when I came home from work, I saw a coin placed on our carpet in the living room. During that time, people didn't use coins in Haiti, so it was extremely strange to see a rusty coin lying in the middle of the carpet. It was clear that someone had deliberately placed it there. When Robbie came home from work, I asked him if he had placed the coin there. As I suspected, he knew nothing about it. He was just as surprised as I was. My husband went to a pandit, Hindustani priest, with the coin. When Robbie told him everything, that the coin suddenly lay in the middle of our carpet, the pandit just started laughing. I don't know what he found so funny about it, but his advice was for Robbie to throw the coin into a canal with flowing water. After he had thrown the coin in there, he had to walk away and not look back. Exactly as the pandit had said, that's what my husband did. Believe it or not, within a few months, I discovered that I was pregnant. My husband and I were overjoyed. This was a moment we had been waiting for so long, and it was finally happening. Unfortunately, I didn't have an easy pregnancy because from the beginning, I felt sick. It wasn't like a normal pregnancy where you really enjoy being pregnant. It was so bad with me that I was constantly being admitted to the hospital. Every time I went for a checkup, I was admitted. My physical and mental health deteriorated so badly that I really began to doubt myself and everything around me. I don't know what happened to me, but I had strange ideas in my head. I wanted this to stop and wanted to end my life. So, I kept thinking about jumping from the highest floor in the hospital. I had never been someone who thought about suicide, but suddenly, these kinds of thoughts came into my head. I didn't understand why this was happening suddenly. I fought against it every day while lying in the hospital to prevent it from happening. When I was 8 months pregnant, I gave birth prematurely via a cesarean section. I had a daughter named Aileen, fictional name. Because Aileen was born prematurely, she was weak. Therefore, the doctor had to keep her in the incubator for 1 month. Aileen even weighed less than a chicken and was very small. Only after a month was my baby allowed to go home with me. 3 months after giving birth, my husband and I had to go back to work as usual, so the baby had to go to daycare. I still lived in the family cottage as a caretaker, so I aimed to build my own house. I wanted to accept as little as possible from my mean mother-in-law. I just didn't trust that woman. Robbie's grandmother had plots of land in her name, and she gave those plots to my mother-in-law to distribute among her 5 children. Robbie, as the eldest son, naturally got a plot, and so we started building. At first, the house wasn't finished. We planned to live in that house and gradually finish it bit by bit. When I started living in our own house, I kept seeing a shadow of a snake in my house. This made me fearful in my own home. I didn't feel comfortable, and it seemed like someone was always talking to me when I was home alone. This only made me more anxious because I was sure that no one else was present in the house when something spoke to me. My house also had an uncomfortable, unpleasant, dark, strange, cold atmosphere, and the corridors of the house were always very dark, no matter what I did to make them brighter and cheerier. The house just felt wrong, and I always felt watched and not alone. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination and carried on with my life. As time went by, I started feeling sick. I became ill more and more frequently, which was extremely difficult for me because I constantly had to take time off work. Sometimes I would go to work in the morning as if nothing was wrong, but once there, I would suddenly feel very weak and ill. I went to the doctor, and he prescribed me various medications. They helped for a short while, but then it was back to square one. Because I was constantly sick, I lost my job and had to find work elsewhere. But the same thing happened there. I would get sick, and I had to switch jobs frequently. The sickness persisted. Sometimes I felt fine in the morning, but then out of nowhere, I would start feeling terribly ill. I grew tired of it, and it was no way to live. I experienced excruciating headaches that made me want to scream in pain. As if that wasn't bad enough, I also felt extremely nauseous. Everything would spin before my eyes, and my body ached all over. Someone advised me to seek help from outside. Honestly, I didn't believe in paranormal stuff and events at the time, but I was at my wit's end and decided to seek help anyway. The person I went to said I had too many enemies working against me. As a solution, my family and I had to undergo a spiritual cleansing ritual. We did as advised, but even after the ritual, I didn't get better. Eventually, I became so ill that I quit my job and decided to stay home. To this day, I haven't worked. My husband and I also couldn't conceive another child. After a month of constant illness, I became emaciated. I could hardly stand. I didn't want to eat and felt weak. Everyone who knew me and saw me was shocked by my appearance and asked how I became alarmingly thin. I couldn't give them a sensible answer because I didn't know what was going wrong in my life. I made efforts to seek help from various people, even on a cultural level, but no one could help me. Eventually, I became desperate and lost hope of finding help anywhere. As a woman of 30, I developed diabetes. Sometimes I would experience chest pains, and when I went to the doctor, I was referred to the hospital. I underwent various tests to rule out any heart-related issues. After several examinations, it turned out that there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. After seeking help from so many places, I reached out to the 6th person. The 6th person happened to be a medium of Indian descent. When I approached him, I was under his treatment for a year. After my first spiritual cleansing, I had the biggest shock of my life. I saw my life flash before my eyes like a movie. I got to see who was behind all my miseries, my illnesses, my suicidal tendencies, my pain, bitter tears, and sorrow all those years. who the culprit was behind all of this. It turned out to be my own mother-in-law. She was behind it all. I knew she was mean and wicked, but I never thought she would go to such lengths, wanting to kill me herself. But the visions I received after that cleansing were clear. I got all the answers very clearly about what had been happening all these years. The worst part was that my mother-in-law wasn't doing this alone. She was aided by her youngest daughter, my sister-in-law. I also saw through my visions that my sister-in-law was a witch. I don't know how they managed to do this, but if my mother-in-law was so far gone with her demonic activities, she would surely know how to turn her daughter into a witch. Perhaps it was a sacrifice in exchange for something else. I have no idea, but the fact remains that my sister-in-law is a witch. After 28 years of marriage, I finally got answers as to why my life was such a living hell. My mother-in-law performed rituals, manipulated me in such a way that my marriage to her son would never be happy. Her goal was to make me so sick, make me suffer terribly, and ultimately, I would die. No one would suspect anything, and her son would be rid of me. This was her plan. She wasn't pleased with me as a daughter-in-law, even though I had never done anything to harm her. In 1 year of treatment with the medium, I uncovered many dark secrets of my in-laws, which I had never even dreamed of. I am currently at a point in my life where I can't sleep peacefully. I wake up startled from my sleep every time. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. It keeps happening that I wake up startled. It feels as if something invisible is trying to enter my body, but because of the protection I received from the Javanese medium, the thing cannot enter my body. I saw in my visions how my mother-in-law performed all kinds of rituals on my property. The purpose of these rituals was to make me even sicker than I was before. So, she was still very much focused on me. I couldn't imagine how someone could have so much hate for me, even though I had always been nothing but kind to her. Even when I knew she wasn't a good person, I just went along with whatever she wanted for the sake of peace. I was a good daughter-in-law, as expected of a Hindu daughter-in-law. After my mother-in-law performed her rituals on my property, and I clearly noticed that I was deteriorating in every aspect of my life, I wanted to move. But something held me back, and I couldn't take the step to move. Something always came up, preventing the move from happening. Either I became extremely ill, barely having enough energy to do small things, let alone a whole move. It felt like I was caught in a vicious cycle from which I couldn't escape. I kept wanting to move, but it just wouldn't happen. There was always another reason. I knew in the back of my mind that my mother-in-law was behind it, but at the same time, those things she was working on me with were also playing with my thoughts, making me think I was imagining it all and that none of it was true. Through that Indian man, I found out that my mother-in-law also sacrifices for a snake she serves. She has been doing this for a long time. Of course, it's not a normal snake, and most likely, the large snake that appeared in the backyard was exactly the snake she used for her witchcraft activities. Perhaps she hadn't given that snake what it wanted on time, and that's why the snake came to shame her. Because I remember her making every effort to get rid of that snake from there. She was ashamed that the neighbors had seen the creature. She clearly felt caught, only I didn't understand that during the incident. Only when I later started putting all the events together did I realize that everything had gone wrong in my life because of this same evil mother-in-law. I couldn't obtain my driver's license because of her demonic voodoo practices. My marriage was extremely difficult, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Having a child was nearly impossible, and I consider myself lucky that one child came from our marriage, because if it were up to my mother-in-law, there would never have been a child. Because of her, I lost all the jobs I had because I was constantly ill. All the work of this evil person. My mother-in-law now knows that I've found out that she worked her black magic on me and sabotaged and ruined my future. She has never denied this and mercilessly continues her devilish rituals to destroy me. Since my discovery, I have cut off all contact with her, and we don't visit her at all anymore. I don't want to endanger my life or my child's life because she is not above harming my child just to torment me. She will stop at nothing to achieve her goal. She has no mercy. There hasn't been a single moment where she reflected and regretted all the cruel things she did to me or her own son. Because indirectly, she also tormented her own son. If I was constantly sick, he had to take extra care of me and spend more money on doctors and tests. It was extremely difficult for both of us, not just for me. Fortunately, Robbie chose me despite everything. But my mother-in-law would have preferred to tear us apart as quickly as possible. But our love was clearly stronger than all her devilish powers combined. Robbie said he never knew his mother was involved in black magic, but at the same time, it didn't seem like he cared. He was very indifferent about it, which immediately made me think that his mother had also worked on him to keep his eyes closed. So, he wouldn't be able to see what she was up to, because he is aware of everything she did to us, and yet he reacts coolly to it, which is not normal. I haven't kept this whole story a secret from my husband's family. I have talked to all family members about what my mother-in-law has done to me, and that this is still going on because that woman just won't give up. Her only goal is to destroy me until I take my last breath. But the family seemed unwilling to believe that the oh-so-sweet mother-in-law was capable of such things. They refused to believe it because she was always so kind to the outside world. On the other hand, I can also understand that because she is very cunning and the outside world doesn't know who she really is. But I lived in her house for 8 years, and they say you only know someone when you live with them. People who don't know her will think she's a sweet, gentle woman, and this is exactly the idea she wants to convey to everyone. But I know better, with which devilish snake I'm dealing with. Eventually, because of my mother-in-law, I had a falling out with the rest of my husband's family, because she has been bad-mouthing me everywhere. To this day, I have health problems and have never been the same. I noticed that her witchcraft, which she used on our marriage, is finally taking effect because Robbie is starting to treat me badly. He doesn't realize it, but I do. When I confront him about it, he is completely unaware of the unpleasant way he treats me. I often get the feeling that he's not himself, that he's possessed by something, because he often says very strange things out of the blue, things he can't remember later. He is often suddenly angry or aggressive, but later doesn't remember anything. This proves to me that that wicked woman is still messing with us. It's also logical that Robbie doesn't think about moving, because I increasingly realize that my mother-in-law is not only working on me, but now also heavily on her son. Because I sought help from that Indian man and received protection, her demons don't have as much effect on me anymore. So, all she can do is try to destroy me through her own son. Robbie constantly seems not to be himself. Sometimes he is present, but often he is not. He seems confused, doesn't remember anything he said or did shortly before. He also has no goals to move forward in life, whereas he used to. But it's as if he doesn't even remember that himself, as if my mother-in-law has emptied his whole head with her witchcraft. She has destroyed all future dreams and goals for both of us. Our marriage is now falling apart. I only see decline here now. My mother-in-law is slowly winning the battle. That's how it feels. Sometimes I try to comfort myself that this is simply not the case, that my mother-in-law is no longer bothering us. But the facts speak for themselves, because our electrical appliances inexplicably break down one after the other in our home. It's not our wiring. We've had that checked. Rice, vegetables, fruit, and food also strangely sour within no time, proving that negative energies are at work. Often, other financial setbacks suddenly come our way, causing us to constantly decline and not seem to make progress. I've caught my sister-in-law many times red-handed, secretly performing rituals on our property. She lives one plot away from us, so she can easily keep an eye on us and knows exactly when we're not home. But sometimes I came home earlier than she expected, and I caught her busy burying things on my property. I also saw several times that she put something in a pot and placed it on my property. Another time, she worked on a porcupine with demons and left it on my terrace. I don't need to guess who incited my sister-in-law to do these things on my property. No wonder we could never keep pets, because strangely enough, they all died shortly after coming to our property. The witchcraft on my property is slowly starting to have an effect. I only see decline. It's a real struggle for me. My husband isn't doing so well either, as I mentioned. He keeps waking up as if something is grabbing and scaring him. He is clearly upset every time this happens. I have the same experience, but it usually happens to me around midnight, that I am then attacked. It has been a true roller coaster for me since I got married and this mother-in-law entered my life. But the hell I live in is not over yet. It's still ongoing. That devilish mother-in-law is still alive. I am not rid of this burden I must live with. I would like to be completely rid of all that demonic stuff my mother-in-law works with, but unfortunately, it's not possible. I am at my wit's end. If anyone wants to offer help, or if you know someone who is not a scammer and can help, please let me know in the comments, and I will contact them myself.